Sick of getting blisters? Stop slipping and just be comfortable with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Great fit, great comfort, lots of grip, and an even better price. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
Designed with women in mind, but according to Nike, football boots that anybody can wear, the Nike Phantom Luna features elements from some of their current models as well as some of their past, ultimately creating something that is a lot better than I was personally expecting. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the brand new Nike Phantom Luna Elite, a new Phantom model from Nike that doesn't replace the GX, but instead sits alongside it as an alternate option, with the Luna emphasizing a by women for women design philosophy with injury prevention in mind. It also features a lot of similar elements to the Phantom GX in a grippy Nike GripKnit Flyknit based upper, a mid-cut design with the Luna, unlike the GX as of right now at least, only being available as a mid, and perhaps the most distinctive element of the football boot, the Nike Cyclone 360 stud pattern, designed to allow you to twist and pivot a little bit more freely for the sake of reducing the risk of knee and ankle injuries. And of course, just like all of Nike's other mid-cut elite model football boots, the retail price on the Phantom Luna is $275. With, in my opinion, the big question being, is the Phantom Luna justified in Nike's current lineup, given the similarities that it shares with the already fantastic Phantom GX? There's also people drawing comparisons to the Magista Obra. I personally think that it compares a lot to the Phantom GT. There are some effective and not so effective elements that do make these unique. The question is whether or not they're actually worth it. We're going to go over all those details, including how they fit and feel on feet. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around. And if you are interested in a pair for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the first link down below. First things first, I just want to clarify the sizing of the Phantom Luna, because they have actually listed the women's size first rather than the men's size, which is basically just the opposite of what they typically do with their football boot launches. And the best way to show this is just to take a look at the box label, where you can see this is an 11 US in women's, but a 9.5 US in men's. Where you can see on this box for a pair of Vapor 15 Elites, it's a 9.5 US in men's, but an 11 in women's. In other words, if you normally buy your boots in men's sizing, all you have to do is go up 1.5 sizes to have the equivalent men's size. In other words, an 11 US women's would equal a 9.5 US men's, which is exactly what I normally wear, and the length is perfect. The shaping of the boot does have some women's specific elements according to Nike as well, but we'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. I would argue, however, the shape isn't actually that different from the Phantom GX. Moving on to the upper, it is very clearly listed as Nike GripKnit, which is technically, on paper at least, the same material you're going to find on the Phantom GX. So why have two Phantom models with the exact same material on the upper? Well, in reality, they're actually quite a bit different. What you're going to find on the Phantom Luna is that it's more of a traditional Flyknit base with a polyurethane top layer, and that the smooth areas of the upper kind of feel like Nike's smooth Flyknit uppers that we used to get in the days of the Magista Obra 1 and the Superfly 4, for example. But you'll find these raised lines, almost like ridges, that have some significant grippiness to them that feels more along the lines of the super grippy texture that you get on the Phantom GX. The end result, because these ridges do cover the majority of the upper, both on the lateral and the medial side, it ends up feeling more grippy on the ball than you might expect based on how the boots feel in your hands, where the Phantom GX is just grippy across the entire upper. The end result, however, like I said, is all over grip, but not so much grip that the boots feel sticky. It's just giving you that little bit of extra abrasion on the ball, which ultimately does provide a sense of control that you otherwise wouldn't necessarily have. What also makes this a little bit different from the Phantom GX is that the upper feels more structured. It doesn't have quite the same sock-like feel to it, and that's because the polyurethane top layer does seem to have a little bit more structure, and it also has some additional padding on the inside liner, which means that the touch on the ball is still relatively thin. There's definitely not a lot of padding to this, but in comparison to the Phantom GX, where the liner is basically just a thin layer of polyurethane, this has that little bit of sponginess to it, which again does kind of relate it back to something like a Magista Obra. You'll also notice that unlike the Phantom GX, these feature an asymmetrical lacing system that's pushed slightly to the medial side, which again relates it back to the days of the CTR 360 and Magista Obra, and honestly a setup that I really do like. I would argue that the shape of this football boot is very reminiscent of that on the Phantom GX. However, the laces being positioned here rather than on the lateral side and also running a little bit deeper, I think actually makes for a better overall fit. And when you pair that up with the more structured feel of this upper, the Phantom Luna does in turn end up feeling more responsive and more speed boot-esque in a lot of ways than that of the Phantom GX. So if you like that slightly, I don't want to say stiffer, but more structured feel to the upper of your football boots with better overall lockdown through the midfoot and forefoot, the Phantom Luna, I think, does that better than the Phantom GX. Moving to the rear, you're going to find a DF mid-cut collar, as we've seen from Nike many times before, made from an elasticated Flyknit material. It's a little bit higher on the medial side than it is on the lateral side and kind of has some curvature at the front and back where it dips down. You'll also find that just like the Phantom GX, they have cut out a section at the back of the heel to make it very, very flexible, according to Nike. That is to reduce strain on the Achilles tendon and in turn make the boots more comfortable. I can't necessarily say that I found that to be the case on these or even on the Phantom GX, which again has the exact same feature, but I can tell you that on this boot in particular, with the design of this collar, it does make putting the boots on a little bit more difficult just because this area constantly wants to collapse and just makes putting the boots on a little bit trickier than it perhaps needs to be. On the inside heel liner, you're going to find some smooth microfiber material with some perforations throughout. It's got a decent amount of padding and in general feels really, really comfortable. It's the same kind of heel liner construction that we've been seeing on mid-cut Nike football boots for a little while now. And then the insole, fully removable. I'll give you guys a quick look at that. It features this really soft, almost like synthetic suede microfiber type material on the surface that does a nice job of gripping your socks. I really, really like this liner. And then the insole is, again, pretty much the same as the Phantom GX, giving you that fingerprint texturing that ultimately does nothing but does look quite cool. Which brings us to the base of the football boot, the sole plate and stud pattern, where I think Nike is making the boldest claims in regards to the Phantom Luna and where I personally had the most amount of skepticism prior to trying them out. As for the plastic base itself, it's really, really structured. It might look quite simple, just having kind of this X-shaped stiffener bar through the middle, but it really does make the heel and midfoot of this sole plate incredibly firm. There is no give to this whatsoever, which is basically the exact opposite of the Phantom GX. And as far as the flex in the forefoot is concerned, it definitely takes some force, but doesn't necessarily have that spring back effect that you might get from something like a Mercurial. It kind of just has that old school, stiffer, solid feel, which again, isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is something to be aware of and kind of unusual for Nike at this point, given how their sole plates have definitely trended towards being thinner and generally a little bit more flexible. But it's realistically the Cyclone 360 stud layout here in orange that Nike was really touting as an injury prevention feature, where all of these bladed studs in this circular pattern are going to allow for freedom to twist and pivot, reducing stress on the knees and reducing the risk of injury. Upon looking at this particular layout, I really thought that this was going to cling more rather than rotate more freely. And I'm still going to stand by the fact that I really think if they wanted to make rotational movements a priority, they should have just stuck with conical studs. That ultimately does make for better rotational movement and that you don't have any hard edges. They're just perfectly round. They twist and turn a lot more freely. However, I was actually really surprised at how much grip you got from this stud pattern while also still having that freedom to twist and pivot. I definitely don't think that this would be a good layout for anybody to be using on artificial grass. On that type of playing surface, this is pretty much as clingy and as dangerous as you can get as far as stud patterns go. But for whatever reason, I'm not sure if it's based on the angles of the studs or perhaps how thin they are, they do actually move and cut through the grass quite nicely without feeling like you're stuck in the ground and unable to pivot, which is typically when those injuries happen. Your foot stays stuck, your knee turns, and that's when you put excessive strain on yourself. Everything else I would say is pretty Mercurial-esque in terms of having these bladed studs at the base of the forefoot and then 4 bladed studs under the heel. Overall, the stud pattern feels very aggressive, and I would say it trends more towards the Mercurial line than the current Phantom GX, but overall, other than maybe the unnecessarily, I don't want to say bulky, but maybe solid feel to the sole plate that I personally wasn't expecting, I actually really like this sole plate and stud pattern layout. Will the Cyclone 360 technology truly prevent injuries, however? That kind of remains to be seen. Which brings us to the weight, where I guess somewhat surprisingly, the Phantom Luna is not as light as I was expecting it to be. In fact, it's one of the heavier Nike top-end models that they've put out in quite some time. So we're going to weigh them using this scale, but I also thought it'd be fun to compare them to the current Phantom GX in the mid-cut variation, because it just seems like the logical comparison to make. Let's see what the difference is, both in the same size 9.5 US. We'll start off with the Phantom Luna, and you can see that they weigh in at 8.25 ounces, the equivalent of 234 grams, which again is the only top-end model from Nike right now, at least in this size, that comes in over 8 ounces. Then we'll throw on the mid-cut Phantom GX, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.55 ounces, the equivalent of 214 grams. That is a weight difference of 20 grams in total, which might not seem like a lot, and in a lot of ways it isn't, but in terms of the feel, both in hand as well as on feet, the current Phantom GX, as well as all of Nike's other top-end models, will feel noticeably lighter than the Phantom Luna. On feet, I would say the Phantom Luna reminds me a lot of the Phantom GX as well as the Phantom GT that came before it. It's similar to the GX in regards to overall shape, where I think, again, with the Phantom Luna being presented as a by women, for women football boot, especially coming in women's sizes, the automatic assumption is going to be that they are super narrow, but that's not actually the case. This is pretty normal in terms of width through the heel and midfoot, as well as even the forefoot. It has, I would say, an above average wide forefoot, but then pinches in the toe box area. Again, very reminiscent to the Phantom GX, and honestly, even the Phantom GT. What I do like about the Luna more so than the GX is the lacing system being pushed to the medial side. It runs a little bit deeper, and I think it wraps your foot really, really nicely with the laces tied tight. The boots overall fit really well. Where I think the boots kind of remind me of Phantom GT a little bit more is that the upper does definitely have more structure to it than what you're going to find on the GX, which almost relates it a little bit more to the Nike Mercurial series in some ways, in that the boots do feel more locked in and more responsive, particularly through the midfoot area when pushing off and changing direction, which again is definitely a good thing. From a width perspective, other than the slightly slimmer and kind of more pointed shape to the toe box area, they're going to be wide enough for most people, so do keep that in mind. And as far as the sizing is concerned, these are technically an 11 US in women's, but because I went up 1.5 sizes in women's sizing, it is an equivalent of my usual men's size 9.5 US, where in that case, the boots do 100% run true to size, just like pretty much all of Nike's other products. So in conclusion, I actually like the Phantom Luna more than I was expecting to. However, I realistically only see two main reasons as to why you would want to buy these over other options on the market, predominantly Nike's own and pre-existing Phantom GX. And that is, one, you just like the way that these look, or two, you really want to believe that this Cyclone 360 stud layout is going to reduce your risk of ankle, knee, and hip injuries, which honestly, I can't say that I believe myself, but like I said, it does rotate more freely than I was expecting. As it relates to Nike's Grip Knit upper, I think this definitely provides plenty of additional grip that a lot of people will like, but I do think the Phantom GX does a better job of that. There's an argument to be made that this might fit people better than the Phantom GX depending on foot shape, but I do think the GX does feel a little bit more comfortable. This does have more structure than the GX, however, making it more responsive, but then I almost compare these to a Nike Mercurial, in which case I would much rather have a Mercurial if I was prioritizing overall responsiveness. The mid-cut design is something that you either love or hate, and not having the option of a low definitely hurts it in this case, and the overall weight of this boot being higher than average, not just for Nike, but for top-end football boots across the board, again, is kind of another strike against the Phantom Luna. Again, not a bad pair of football boots, but one that I don't think does anything better than boots that are already out there. They're really solid boots, but other than a vertical Nike swoosh, they don't do much to actually stand out.